wiped down the scratched wooden bar for the 100th time that evening, his weathered hands moving in practice circles. The neon sign outside flickered intermittently, casting strange shadows through the grimy windows of the last drop, a hole-in-the-wall bar tucked away in the forgotten corners of New Shanghai's industrial district. Steam rose from the streets outside, mixing exhaust fumes with the perpetual drizzle that had plagued the city for weeks. It was nearly closing time when the door chimed, and looked up to see the strangest customer he'd encountered in his 15 years behind the bar. The figure stood nearly 7 feet tall, wrapped in a dark hooded cloak that seemed to shimmer with an otherworldly quality. What caught attention wasn't the size, though it was the eyes that glowed like amber coals beneath the hood, and the faint scent of ozone and something else, something ancient and metallic, that followed the stranger inside. The figure moved with deliberate grace, each step measured and purposeful, as if unused to walking on 2 legs. When he settled onto noticed the way his hands gripped the edge of the counter, too tightly, with fingers that seemed longer than they should be, ending in what looked suspiciously like claws beneath worn leather gloves. "What can I get you?" asked, his voice steady despite the unusual circumstances. In his line of work, he'd learned not to judge customers by their appearance. The city attracted all types, especially in the lower districts where questions weren't asked and credits were the only currency that mattered. The stranger's voice rumbled like distant thunder when he spoke. "I am unfamiliar with your customs. What would you recommend for one who has traveled far and carries heavy burdens?" Studied the figure carefully. There was something in that voice, a quality that spoke of immense loneliness and exhaustion. He'd heard it before, in the voices of soldiers returning from the outer colonies, in the whispers of refugees who'd lost everything. But this was different, deeper, as if the weight the stranger carried was measured not in years but in centuries. "Sounds like you need something with some bite to it," said, reaching for a bottle of aged whiskey from the top shelf. "This here's genuine earth bourbon, aged 20 years, burns going down but leaves you warm." As he poured the amber liquid into a glass, noticed the stranger watching his every movement with intense fascination. When he slid the drink across the bar, their fingers brushed briefly, and felt an electric shock run up his arm. The stranger's skin was unnaturally warm, almost fevered, and had a texture that reminded of scaled leather. The stranger lifted the glass with both hands, inhaling deeply before taking a small sip. His eyes widened beneath the hood, and for a moment caught a glimpse of features that definitely weren't human, elongated face, prominent cheekbones, and skin that seemed to have a faint iridescent quality. "This is remarkable," the stranger said, his voice carrying a note of wonder. "I have consumed many substances across many worlds, but this carries the essence of your planet itself." Raised an eyebrow at the phrasing but didn't comment. Instead, he poured himself a small measure and lifted his glass. "To travelers and the roads that brought them here," he said simply. The stranger stared at the gesture for a long moment before carefully mimicking it. When their glasses clinked together, that same electric sensation ran through, stronger this time. "To unexpected hospitality," the stranger replied, his voice softer now, almost uncertain. They drank in comfortable silence for several minutes, himself with cleaning glasses while keeping an eye on his unusual customer. The stranger seemed to be studying everything, the way the light reflected off the bottles, the sound of rain against the windows, even the soft jazz playing from the ancient speakers in the corner. "I have a question," the stranger said suddenly. "Why do you show kindness to one whose appearance clearly marks him as different?" Paused in his cleaning, considering the question. "My grandfather used to say that everyone's fighting a battle you know nothing about. Seems to me the least we can do is treat each other with a little dignity." He set down the glass and looked directly at his customer. "Besides, different doesn't necessarily mean dangerous, and even if it did, well, we're all dangerous in our own ways." The stranger's grip on his glass tightened, and heard what sounded like a sharp intake of breath. "Your grandfather sounds like he was a wise man." "He was a bartender too," said with a small smile. "Said this job teaches you more about human nature than any university could. People come here when they're at their lowest, their highest, or somewhere in between. Your job isn't to judge, it's to listen, pour drinks, and maybe help them figure out what they need to hear." "And what do you believe I need to hear?" Studied the hooded figure carefully. Despite the stranger's imposing presence, there was something profoundly sad about him, a loneliness that seemed to radiate from his very core. I think you need to hear that whatever you're carrying, whatever weight is on your shoulders, you don't have to carry it alone. The stranger's hand trembled slightly as he raised the glass to his lips again. You speak as if burdens can be shared, but some responsibilities, some choices, they belong to one person alone. Maybe, said, refilling the glass without being asked. But that doesn't mean you can't talk about them. Sometimes just saying the words out loud helps lighten the load. For the first time since entering the bar, the stranger seemed to relax slightly. His shoulders dropped, and he pushed back his hood just enough to reveal more of his features. Tried not to stare at the clearly non-human aspects, the scaled patches along the jawline, the pointed ears, the way his hair seemed to have an almost metallic sheen, but he couldn't hide his curiosity entirely. You are remarkably calm for a human who has just discovered he is serving alcohol to a non-terrestrial being, the stranger observed with what might have been amusement. Son, I've been running this bar for 15 years in a district where half the population has cybernetic implants. A quarter are from off-world colonies, and the rest are trying to forget which category they fall into. Takes more than pointed ears to rattle me. Grinned. Though I'll admit, the glowing eyes are a new one. The stranger made a sound that could have been laughter. You truly are an unusual human. Just human, corrected. Nothing more, nothing less, though I'm curious what brings someone like you to a place like this. Can't imagine we're on many intergalactic travel guides. The stranger's expression grew distant. I came to your world on official business, treaties to negotiate, agreements to finalize, but tonight I found myself with rare free time and a desire to experience your culture without the formality of diplomatic protocols. He paused, swirling the whiskey in his glass. I have heard much about human establishments like this, places where individuals gather to. What is the phrase? Drown their sorrows. Sometimes, said. Sometimes they come to celebrate, sometimes they just need somewhere to think. What about you? What kind of evening is this for you? The stranger was quiet for a long moment and could almost see him wrestling with how much to reveal. The kind where one questions every decision that led to this moment, he said finally. Where the weight of responsibility feels heavier than usual and the path forward seems unclear. Nodded knowingly, leadership troubles. Another pause, longer this time, something like that. The clock on the wall chimed midnight and glanced around the empty bar. By all rights, he should be closing up, sending his last customer on his way and heading home to his small apartment above the electronics shop next door. But something about this stranger, this clearly non-human being sitting in his bar and sharing bourbon like any other troubled soul, made him reluctant to end the conversation. You know, said, I've got nowhere to be tomorrow morning. If you want to keep talking, I've got plenty more where that came from. He gestured to the bottle of bourbon. The stranger looked up sharply and caught his first clear view of his eyes, definitely not human, with pupils that seemed to shift and change in the dim light, and an intelligence that felt ancient and vast. You would extend such hospitality to a stranger, to one who is clearly not of your kind. Hell, some of my best customers aren't of my kind, said with a shrug. There's this guy comes in every Thursday, claims he's from the Tau system. Could be lying, could be telling the truth. Doesn't matter to me, he tips well and doesn't start fights. He leaned against the bar, studying his unusual guest. Besides, seems to me you could use a friend tonight, even if it's just a temporary one. The stranger stared at him for a long moment and had the distinct impression he was being evaluated by standards he couldn't comprehend. Finally, the stranger nodded slowly. I would appreciate that. It has been some time since I have had the opportunity for genuine conversation. Poured them both fresh drinks and settled in for what promised to be an interesting night. Outside, the rain continued to fall, turning the neon-lit streets into rivers of reflected light. Inside the last drop, a human bartender and an alien visitor sat across from each other, separated by species and light years of experience, but united by the simple act of sharing a drink and honest conversation. Neither of them knew that this chance meeting would set in motion events that would reshape both their worlds. All knew was that his customer seemed a little less burdened with each sip, and that was enough for now. All his customer knew was that for the first time in longer than he could remember, he felt something approaching peace. The night was young, and there were many stories yet to be told. 3 hours had passed, and the bottle between them was significantly lighter. Had learned more about alien sociology in one evening than most humans learned in a lifetime, though his guest, who had introduced himself simply as, had been careful to speak in generalities. Still, the picture that emerged was fascinating. A vast galactic civilization spanning hundreds of worlds, with complex political structures and ancient traditions that governed interaction between species. "The thing that puzzles me," said, refilling both their glasses, "is why you're here alone. From what you've told me, someone in your position usually travels with an entourage." Had relaxed considerably over the course of the evening. His hood was down now, revealing features that were strikingly alien yet somehow majestic. His skin had a subtle scaled texture that caught the bar's dim lighting, and his hair fell in metallic silver waves to his shoulders. When he smiled, which he'd been doing more frequently, could see teeth that were clearly designed for a carnivorous diet. "Entourages have their purpose," said carefully, "but they also have ears. Sometimes one needs to think without the weight of ceremony and expectation. Heavy is the head that wears the crown, eh?" Froze with his glass halfway to his lips. "I did not say anything about crowns." Grinned, "Son, I've been listening to people's problems for 15 years. You've got that particular brand of exhaustion that comes from making decisions that affect a lot of lives. Add in your formal way of speaking the fact that you're here on official business, involving treaties, and the way you talk about responsibility and tradition." He shrugged. "Doesn't take a detective to figure out you're someone important." For a moment thought he might have overstepped, set down his glass and regarded him with those unsettling, shifting eyes. Then, to surprise, he began to laugh, a rich, rumbling sound that seemed to fill the entire bar. "You are either very perceptive or very lucky," said when his laughter subsided. "My advisors spend months analyzing intelligence reports to reach conclusions you arrive at through simple observation and intuition. Sometimes the simplest explanations are the right ones," said. "So, what kind of leader are you? The kind who rules through fear, or the kind who actually gives a damn about his people?" The question seemed to strike like a physical blow. His expression grew distant, and he stared into his glass as if it might contain answers to questions he'd been wrestling with for years. "I have tried to be the latter," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "My people, the Draconian Empire we have existed for, we are a proud race, warriors and scholars both, with traditions that predate your civilization by hundreds of thousands of years. For most of our history, we ruled through strength alone. The strong commanded, the weak obeyed, and the galaxy trembled at our approach." Nodded, saying nothing, letting the alien work through whatever he needed to say. "But strength alone is not enough to maintain an empire that spans half the galaxy," continued. "The old ways brought us conquest, but they also brought rebellion, resentment, and endless conflict. When leadership passed to me, I attempted to chart a different course. Diplomacy instead of domination. Cooperation instead of conquest." "Sounds reasonable to me," said. "What's the problem?" His laugh was bitter this time. "The problem is that my people were not bred for reasonable. They were bred for war. Many of my own nobles believe I have grown weak, that I have forgotten what it means to be draconian. They see my diplomatic efforts as capitulation, my desire for peace as cowardice." Poured himself another drink, processing what he was hearing. "So you're trying to drag an entire warrior culture into a more peaceful age, and half of them think you're a traitor for it." "More than half," admitted. "There was an incident recently, a border dispute with a smaller species. Under the old ways, we would have simply conquered their territory and been done with it. Instead, I chose negotiation. The talks failed, some of my people died in skirmishes, and now there are whispers that a true draconian leader would have acted decisively from the beginning." "And what do you think?" The question seemed to catch off guard. "What do I think?" "Yeah, not what your advisors think, not what tradition dictates, not what your people expect. What do you personally believe was the right choice?" Was quiet for a long time, staring at his reflection in the amber liquid. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with uncertainty. "I believe that strength without wisdom is mere brutality. I believe that a leader's first responsibility is to his people's future, not their past. I believe," he paused, struggling with the words, "I believe that the galaxy has room for something other than endless war if only we are brave enough to reach for it." "Then you made the right choice," said simply. "Even though my people died because of it." "People die in wars too, probably more of them and for a lot longer." Leaned forward, meeting alien gaze directly. "Look, I don't know much about running galactic empires, but I know something about leadership. Sometimes you have to make decisions that not everyone will understand or agree with. The question isn't whether you can make everyone happy, you can't. The question is whether you can live with the consequences of doing what you believe is right. Stared at him and could almost see the wheels turning in that ancient, alien mind. You speak as if you have experience with such choices. Snorted, nothing as dramatic as what you're dealing with, but yeah, I've had to make some tough calls. Used to run a construction crew before I took over this place. Lost 2 good men in an accident because I chose to follow safety protocols instead of rushing to meet a deadline. Their families blamed me, said if I'd moved faster, found a way around the regulations, their husbands would still be alive. And how do you live with that knowledge? Same way you're going to live with yours, said, by remembering that the alternative probably would have been worse. Those safety protocols existed because other crews had pushed too hard and lost people. If I'd rushed that job, maybe we'd have saved those 2 men, but maybe we'd have lost 6 instead of 2. He shrugged. You can't save everyone, but you can try to build a world where fewer people need saving. Was silent for several minutes, absorbing this. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the first hints of dawn were beginning to creep across the sky. Realized with surprise that they'd been talking all night. Your people are fortunate to have you, said finally, even if they do not realize it. And your people are fortunate to have a leader who questions himself, replied. The ones who never doubt, never wonder if they're doing the right thing, those are the ones you have to watch out for. Straightened in his chair and noticed a change in his posture, a subtle shift toward something more regal and commanding. There is something I should tell you of the last drop. My presence here tonight was not entirely accidental. Raised an eyebrow but said nothing. The diplomatic mission I mentioned, it concerns Earth. Your species has recently achieved faster-than-light travel, which means you are now eligible for inclusion in the Galactic Council. However, there are concerns about humanity's readiness for such integration. What kind of concerns? Your species has a reputation for violence, for aggression toward anything different from yourselves. Many council races believe that humans are too dangerous to be granted full membership, that you should be quarantined to your own solar system until you prove yourselves capable of peaceful coexistence. Felt a chill run down his spine. And what's your opinion on that? Smiled, and this time there was something genuinely warm in his alien features. My opinion has been significantly influenced by tonight's conversation. I came here expecting to find a species driven by fear and hostility toward outsiders. Instead, I find a human who offers hospitality to a stranger, who listens without judgment, and who speaks wisdom that transcends species barriers. I'm just one guy running a bar, protested. Yes, said, and if one random human in a forgotten corner of your world can show such grace and wisdom, perhaps there is hope for your species after all. He stood, towering over even more when upright. I have a decision to make when I return to my ship. Your words tonight have helped me understand what that decision should be. Stood as well, extending his hand in the traditional human gesture of farewell. Whatever you decide, I hope it works out for everyone involved. Stared at the offered hand for a moment, then grasped it firmly. The electric sensation was stronger than ever, and could swear he felt something pass between them, not just physical contact, but a moment of genuine understanding across the vast gulf of species and experience. Thank you, said, his voice carrying a weight of meaning that transcended the simple words. This has been illuminating. As headed for the door, called after him, Hey, will I see you again? The alien paused at the threshold, looking back with those shifting, luminous eyes. Perhaps, though if we do meet again, the circumstances may be quite different. And with that cryptic statement, he was gone, leaving only the faint scent of ozone and the memory of the most extraordinary conversation of life. As dawn broke over New Shanghai, began the familiar routine of closing up the bar, but his mind was elsewhere, wondering what consequences might flow from a night of shared drinks and honest conversation with a lonely alien emperor. 6 months later was polishing glasses when the news broke. Every screen in the bar, every display in the building, every communication device on Earth suddenly flickered to life with the same message. Humanity had been accepted into the Galactic Council with full membership rights, sponsored by none other than Emperor Rex of the Draconian Empire. Nearly dropped the glass he was holding. The news anchors were beside themselves, struggling to process the implications. Earth's first contact with alien civilization had officially been a disaster. A diplomatic vessel had been destroyed in a misunderstanding with forces, leading to fears that humanity would be branded as aggressors before they'd even had a chance to prove themselves. The scientific community had been predicting decades of isolation, while Earth proved its peaceful intentions. Instead, the most powerful empire in the galaxy had personally vouched for humanity's character and potential. As watched the reports flood in, he began to piece together the larger picture. The diplomatic crisis that had nearly destroyed Earth's chances at galactic citizenship had been resolved not through military action, but through a complex negotiation that had somehow satisfied all parties involved. They had been given territorial concessions, the disputed system had been declared a neutral zone, and Emperor Rex himself had personally guaranteed humanity's peaceful intentions. More remarkably, the same diplomatic solution had been applied to the border dispute between the Draconian Empire and that had mentioned during their night-long conversation. Instead of the conquest that traditionalists had demanded, a new model of cooperative development had been established, with both species sharing resources and technology. Was still processing the news when a familiar shimmer appeared in the air near the bar's entrance. The light bent and twisted, forming a doorway through which stepped a figure he recognized, though looked considerably different than he had 6 months ago. Gone was the worn cloak and casual demeanor. Instead, the alien emperor wore flowing robes that seemed to be cut from starlight itself, with intricate patterns that shifted and moved across the fabric. A circlet of some unknown metal rested on his brow, set with gems that pulsed with their own internal light. When he moved, the air itself seemed to respond, creating small eddies and currents that made his robes billow dramatically. Despite the imperial regalia, his smile was the same warm expression remembered from their first meeting. "Hello," said, his voice carrying the same rumbling quality, but with an added resonance that spoke of absolute authority. "I hope you don't mind the dramatic entrance. My security detail insisted on the portal rather than allowing me to simply walk through your front door again." Looked around his shabby bar, taking in the cracked vinyl booths, the stuttering neon signs, and the general air of benign neglect that characterized the last drop. "Your Imperial Majesty is welcome anytime, but I have to say, this place seems a little beneath your usual standards." Laughed, the sound filling the bar with warmth. "Please, and you would be surprised how refreshing it is to visit somewhere without marble columns and servants bowing every few steps." He moved to the same stool he'd occupied months earlier, though now his presence seemed to transform the entire space around him. "May I have another of those remarkable earth bourbons?" Reached for the same bottle, noting that his hands were steadier than they probably should have been, given that he was serving drinks to the ruler of half the known galaxy. "So," he said as he poured, "I take it the negotiations went well." "Better than well," confirmed, accepting the glass with both hands in the same gesture remembered. "The council vote was unanimous. Earth is now a full member with all the rights and privileges thereof. Your people will have access to galactic trade networks, technological exchanges, and protection under council law." "And the situation?" His expression grew more serious. "Resolved, though not without difficulty. It required me to take a considerable political risk, proposing a new model of cooperation that many of my own people viewed as revolutionary." He took a sip of bourbon, closing his eyes as if savoring both the taste and the memories it evoked. "There were those who called for my abdication, who claimed I had betrayed everything our empire stood for. Felt a chill of worry, and they discovered that sometimes a leader must be willing to lose everything to gain what truly matters." Opened his eyes, and was struck by the confidence he saw there, so different from the uncertainty and doubt that had characterized their first meeting. "I asked my people a simple question. Would they rather be feared throughout the galaxy or respected? Would they prefer to rule through terror or to lead through example?" "What did they say?" "Initially, many chose fear and terror, but when I presented them with the practical benefits of the new approach, increased trade, technological advancement, cultural exchange, an end to the constant threat of rebellion and war, they began to see the wisdom in it." Smiled. "It also helped that our first test of the new model, the agreement, resulted in a 23% increase in imperial revenue within the first quarter." Laughed. "Nothing convinces people like money in their pockets." "Indeed, though I learned something else from that experience, something I wanted to share with you." Leaned forward, his expression growing intense. "Do you remember what you told me about leadership, about making decisions that not everyone will understand?" "Yeah." "You were right, but you didn't go far enough. True leadership isn't just about making difficult decisions. It's about having the courage to abandon the old ways entirely when they no longer serve your people's needs. Raised his glass in a toast. You help me understand that wisdom isn't about following tradition blindly. Sometimes wisdom means having the strength to write new traditions. They drank together in comfortable silence and found himself marveling at the surreal nature of the situation. 6 months ago, he'd been a bartender in a forgotten corner of New Shanghai, serving drinks to whoever wandered in off the street. Now he was apparently friends with one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy, who credited their conversation with reshaping interstellar politics. "There's something else," said, reaching into his robes and producing a small device that looked like crystallized starlight. "The Council has decided that Earth needs an official cultural ambassador, someone to help other species understand human nature and values. Someone who demonstrated the best qualities of humanity in his interactions with a lonely alien traveler." Stared at the device, understanding dawning. "Oh no, 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 no. I'm a bartender, not a diplomat. I don't know the first thing about galactic politics or alien cultures or—" "You know how to listen," interrupted gently. "You know how to show kindness to strangers. You know how to offer wisdom without judgment and hospitality without expectation of reward. These are the qualities that will serve you well in representing your species to the galaxy." "But I'm nobody special," protested. "I'm just a guy who pours drinks and listens to people's problems." "Yes," said, his voice carrying absolute conviction. "And that is exactly what makes you perfect for this role. You don't represent humanity's politicians or its military leaders or its corporate interests. You represent its heart, its fundamental decency, its capacity for compassion toward those who are different." Picked up the crystalline device, feeling its warm weight in his hands. "What does this thing do?" "It's a universal translator and cultural interface. It will allow you to communicate with any species in the galaxy and provide contextual information about their customs and traditions. More importantly, it's also a direct communication link to the Galactic Council and to my own court. If humanity ever needs an advocate or if cultural misunderstandings arise, you'll be able to address them immediately." "And my bars," grinned, "will remain exactly as it is. In fact, I've arranged for it to be declared a protected cultural site. The last drop will serve as Earth's unofficial embassy to the galaxy, a place where beings from across the stars can come to experience authentic human hospitality." He paused, his expression growing more serious. "Though I should warn you, you're likely to get some very unusual customers in the coming months." As if on cue, the bar's front door chimed, and 3 figures entered that definitely weren't human. The first appeared to be made entirely of living crystal, refracting the bar's light into rainbow patterns across the walls. The second looked like a cross between a giant mantis and a tree, with bark-like skin and leaves that rustled despite the lack of any breeze. The third was humanoid, but covered in what appeared to be fur that shifted colors constantly, cycling through the entire visible spectrum. All 3 moved toward the bar with obvious curiosity, chattering among themselves in languages that sounded like nothing had ever heard. "Ah," said with obvious amusement. "It appears word has already spread through certain diplomatic circles about the human establishment that serves excellent alcohol and even better conversation." Looked from the approaching aliens to the device in his hands too, who was watching him with expectant eyes. He thought about his quiet life, his simple routine, the comfortable anonymity he'd enjoyed for 43 years. Then he thought about the loneliness he'd seen in his eyes during their first meeting, and how that loneliness had transformed into confidence and purpose through nothing more than honest conversation and shared drinks. "Well," said, slipping the translator device into his pocket and reaching for additional glasses, "I guess we'd better find out what crystal people drink." The 3 aliens reached the bar just as finished setting up glasses. The crystal being spoke first, its voice like wind chimes in a gentle breeze, and was startled to hear the words translated clearly in his mind. "Greetings, human. We have traveled far to experience the legendary hospitality of this establishment." Looked at, who nodded encouragingly, then turned back to his new customers. "Welcome to the last drop. I'll be your bartender tonight. What brings you to Earth?" As the crystal being began to explain their diplomatic mission to establish trade relations between Earth and the mineral collective of 442b, caught's eye in the mirror behind the bar. The Dragon Emperor raised his glass in a subtle salute and nodded in return. Outside, the neon sign flickered against the night sky of New Shanghai, casting its familiar glow over streets that would never look quite the same again. But inside the last drop, the routine remained unchanged. Pour drinks, listen to stories, offer wisdom when asked and silence when needed. The only difference now was that the stories came from across the galaxy, and the wisdom shared around his bar might help shape the future of interstellar civilization. Had always believed that everyone was fighting a battle you knew nothing about. He just never imagined that some of those battles would involve the fate of entire star systems. As he served his first round of drinks to his new alien customers, reflected that life had a funny way of preparing you for things you never saw coming. 15 years of listening to human problems had apparently been excellent training for listening to galactic ones. The universe, it seemed, was just a bigger neighborhood than he'd originally thought, and the last drop was about to become its favorite corner bar.